What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. As promised, today we are getting back into the NBA playoffs after wrapping up our draft coverage last week with our NFL draft recap. If you missed that show, go check that out. Might help you out with your dynasty leagues if you're doing rookie drafts like Matt and I are right now, or if you're just obsessed with the NFL draft and can't get enough coverage. It was a good episode last week. We had a lot of fun doing it. A little while ago, we mentioned that when we got back into the NBA playoffs, we were going to blow it out. We were going to have guests on. We were going to do all sorts of stuff. So in that vein, we have fan favorites Clint and Devin joining us. You'll remember Clint from right before we started the NFL draft stuff. He came on to talk some college basketball and some NBA. Devin was with us through the NBA playoffs all year last year, up to the Warriors winning the championship. So two guys that we really enjoy talking basketball with, and we're really looking forward to having them on. Let's go. All right, we are back. We got Matt. We got Devin. We got Clint. Much like the Knicks and Heat, it is a blowout. How is everybody doing?
Very
Doing
good.
good, man. Doing great. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm glad we're moving on from the other blowout we were just talking about.
I've talked about my son's blowouts enough today. It's been a rough couple days here at the Fowler household. So if my voice is scratchy throughout the podcast, I apologize. But we got plenty of people to kind of talk through some of these playoff series. So I won't do the majority of the talking today. But it's been a good playoff so far. We haven't really touched on a lot of what's been going on because Matt and I were doing the NFL draft stuff that we just wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
Also kind of saved my sanity. Matt and I talked about my horrible Sunday from a couple Sundays ago where I watched my favorite NBA team and my favorite NHL team blow game sevens. So I wasn't ready to talk about basketball until now, but I'm ready, man. I've been watching a ton. I'm excited about the playoff series that we have left. So let's jump right into it. And I want to get started with the series that's actually going on as we're recording this, the Celtics and the 76ers. One of the hard things about doing the podcast during playoff season is that we're usually recording during games. So it's Tuesday the 9th right now. And I'm going to start talking about why Jason Tatum's not a top 10 player. And he's probably going to drop like 56 in the second half or something like that and prove me wrong. But so series is tied 2-2. Game 5 is on right now. How are we feeling about Celtics Sixers?
Celtics Sixers is probably going to be the most competitive or tied for either the first or second most competitive series of like this round of the playoffs. You have two pretty good teams going out, and I think everybody's hitting on all cylinders minus Embiid, but even hurt, he's looked pretty good too. So I think that overall, it's been one of the more entertaining series to watch, and it's given some fans, I would say, some hope for James Harden. I guess that's like the polite way to put it.
Historically, I've not been a big fan of James Harden. I feel like for his career, but he really showed up big in game one when they needed it. And despite not really playing well at all in games 2 and 3, which I thought was just classic James Harden, he really came back with a solid game 4. And then going to the Celtics side of it, Adam, what you were, kind of saying about Jason Tatum not being as good of a player or not being a great player is it's in that last loss they had, when he kicked it out to Marcus Smart at the end for a 3 that went in, but it didn't count. It was like, you got to take that layup, man. I don't know if you know what play I'm talking about, but he kind of he didn't have a great angle at it, but people talk about you like you're an MVP candidate. Like you have to, I don't know why you keep passing it out to Marcus Smart. Like, just you gotta take that layup and give yourself the chance. Like, draw a foul.
Well,
I don't know.
That's the exact thing that
basically had people meme Ben Simmons out of Philly. Not that there was not enough other evidence to say maybe move on from him, but like if you want to plant that flag on the court and say that you're that dude, like you got to take that. Like you said, get to the foul line or make the tough layup. Like that was your time to take over, and you're kicking it out to. While Marcus Smart has improved over the years as a perimeter shooter, not a guy that I want to rely on when I need it most to hit a three.
And I feel like you just have to recognize that there's not enough time left on the clock to do that. Like, no. I think he should have made a different call. And why does it seem like the past 2 seasons, Jaylen Brown is actually the Celtics' best player? Yeah.
I'm half joking about the Tatum thing, mostly because when we did our NBA top 30 rankings and we put Tatum outside the top 10, I still have a lot of Celtics fans in my life who give me shit for that. Predominantly my dad. But I feel like Jason Tatum's like a microcosm of the Celtics as a whole, where it's a team that has all the talent in the world, but lacks the killer instinct that they need to win 4 straight playoff series. And we talked a ton of Celtics on this pod last year with Devin actually in the playoffs because they went so far. And I'm watching the same movie again this year with this team. Like, I just feel like they should be better. And there's just something missing with them, even though it's one of the best rosters that we have in the entire league.
Well, I think it comes down to like Tatum isn't going to be the guy who's, gonna think that his shit doesn't stink. He's a team ball player. And I think that's how he approaches the game first. So he's going to be the guy who's going to say, I'll make the extra pass because I think that's the smart basketball decision, not this is my time to shine and this is how I become a bona fide superstar, which I can appreciate where he's coming from, but somebody's got to be the guy. And at some point in time, like that's your opportunity. And that could be the difference between, getting a really big contract or just kind of that's where you're going to stay at for your career. Now, the Celtics are very, very loyal to him, or at least I would think they are. They've demonstrated that. But it's kind of hard when he really does kind of have the class act kind of role on the team. He doesn't go out of his way to be boisterous or whatever that I'm aware of. I could be wrong there, but I think it like in his head, he made the quote unquote correct basketball play, which I mean, that can be argued, I guess, but overall, I don't think his head is they don't have the Kobe, and it reminds me of the 92 Dream Team when they played like a bunch of the college kids. And they were all really tentative or hesitant. They didn't want to step on people's toes. And then, the next game that they play or the next day they come into practice, it's completely different because they said, no, guys, like use the attitudes that you have, use that killer instinct, you'll gel. Like that's what you do. And they went out and they, blew the doors off the hinges. If they had like a moment like that in Boston, I think the team would elevate to like even like a better level, and they would probably have a good chance to win the whole thing if that occurred. But I think they still have a lot of maturing to do.
That's kind of the problem with this team too, is that like Marcus Smart is the alpha on this team. Like he's probably the 3rd or 4th best player on the floor, but he's the leader and he's the alpha player, and he's the one that's taking the game winning or the game tying shot, not Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And I think Marcus Smart looks at it and he's like, well, I should take the game tying shot or the game winning shot because I'm just as good as Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are. And neither of those guys is going to put him in his place because they don't want to step on any toes.
There's some maturing that needs to be done. The young star duo that they have, because I want to acknowledge that like what Clint said about Tatum is true, and that's it's valid. Like there is a lot of value to making the smart basketball play, and 99% of those situations, yeah, more often than not, that's going to be the right play. But like statistics mean nothing to the individual. And in that individual moment, when you need that bucket, you gotta attack. You gotta put the other team on their heels because you are that good.
Well, you would think with how obsessed he is with Kobe that he'd be a little bit more selfish as well. I'm still bothered by him wearing the Kobe armband last year.
Same.
I still can't get over it.
I don't like it.
It is interesting because you can tell he clearly incorporates a lot of what Kobe did into his game, but like the personality is completely different for sure.
Yeah. He is not the Mamba mentality.
No. In the dynamic that they have at this point in time, he doesn't need to have full Mamba mentality because that like rubbed a lot of people the wrong way too. Yeah. Kobe, like a lot of people who played with Kobe said that he was a fucking asshole. And like I loved him. Like I love Kobe.
Yeah.
He held people to his standard, which was extraordinarily high. And I think especially as like we age or we get older, kids coming up into the league or kids coming up into college, it's a lot different than getting screamed at. Like I told Matt a story today about how I made one of my coaches spike a basketball. And I don't know how much that happens now, but I feel like it's a lot less than when I was in school. I do want to I want to give James Harden some credit, which is something that Devin, I'm kind of like you. I have like shit talked James Harden into the ground. Like I hate this guy.
Yeah.
Right. I don't like the way he plays and I don't like his attitude. But he did something like he's matured a lot. And I think he's really just kind of stepped into a role that he's comfortable with where he doesn't have to shoulder like an enormous amount of the burden because some of that's fallen to Embiid. But like I was blown away that he invited one of the victims of the shooting at an MSU's campus to Game 4, and he like flew them out there on his dime. Not necessarily basketball related, but that's like a step in the right direction where I want to see James Harden become like, okay, you're showing that you have some leadership. You're showing that you got some integrity now. Like, I'm going to start taking you a little more seriously because you've taken some steps in the right direction this year. And I think Philadelphia has seen that in the playoffs too.
You got to give him credit for thinking about someone other than himself for once.
Yeah, because historically he's been like, fuck everybody. I'm going to do what I want because I'm James Harden. And I don't have to listen to you because the sound isn't going to penetrate my beard.
You know what's like interesting? Because apparently he went to, was it in between games? Did he go to?
He went to Vegas.
He went to Vegas. Yeah. And it's like,
yeah,
okay, that's fine. And, Doc Rivers, they interviewed for it. He's like, yeah, well, Dennis Rodman did it. Dennis Rodman was not the focal point of one of the focal points of your offense. I mean, he was a very important player for that Bulls team. But that's my issue with James Harden. It always has been. It's sort of that, like, seemingly you don't really care that much about being here. Like, I guess even that if that's not necessarily the case, like you can go to Vegas and still, in between a series or in the middle of a series and still care about the outcome of it. It's just, it's something I've never really jived with. But yeah, I actually didn't even know that he did that for that victim of the shooting. It's pretty cool.
I will say counterpoint that like James Harden issue is like effort. So as long as you're showing me effort, then I'll let you go to Vegas. But
for sure,
as soon as someone spins you the fuck around and you're looking for your mouthpiece, like Mike Tyson just hit you in the goddamn jaw, and you're not getting back on defense, then like the criticism is going to come, which historically he's been lazy. And he like gives up on plays and stuff. I haven't seen an awful lot of that this like postseason, but that's the James Harden that we're used to. So I would totally say that it's not the same because Dennis Rodman could have been coming off a 3-day bender and he was going to give you the same effort as if he would have been, sober for the week prior to it, even though he probably wasn't.
He generally kept himself in pretty good shape too, like
Yeah.
relative to the NBA. Whereas we've all seen Harden get a little husky.
I
So
am
Harden
interested
looked
to
like I
see.
did at the beginning of the year.
I mean,
Or
I
I
am
do.
interested to see how the rest of the series plays out and just sort of how what happens with the 76ers for the remainder of the playoffs because like you said, it's like if you're giving me an effort, that's great. I feel like historically he's sort of, whether it's a game 7 or just the playoffs in general, is just he's had really good games so far in this series, which is great. But I feel like I don't want to throw the word choking out there, but I've seen plenty of series where he just disappears, or when the team has a chance to, what was it, when they had a chance to beat the Warriors in, was it 2018, 2017, 2018, maybe
Yeah, it was back
2019?
there.
Yeah.
It's like there have been instances of, of him falling apart, and then then he would go to, go do something or whatever, and again, it's fine, but it's like if you're choking and then you're also doing those things where you're like, yeah, I mean, James Harden, I can do this. Like, that's fine. Like, okay, but I'm going to criticize you for it. But yeah, I mean, hypothetically, if he keeps playing as well as he's doing now, yeah, I wouldn't care if I was, a huge fan of the 76ers.
I think that a big thing of like why he's doing so well is because like Embiid's there. And he's
Oh,
going to
yeah.
be the lightning rod for a lot of the ire if they aren't doing well, because his offense is like what is doing the bulk of like the work. Like I know the offense runs through James Harden, but if Embiid isn't established, then the game kind of just grinds to a halt because they don't have like a lot of firepower in that regard. So I think that gives James a little bit of pressure, or it takes a little bit of pressure off of him, so that he doesn't have to worry about having another 3 for 20 whatever night from behind the arc, or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he doesn't have to do as much, which means he doesn't have to, like, the pressure's not there.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Clint, earlier you said that James Harden doesn't care about anybody but himself, but I would argue that he cares very deeply about the strippers of the greater Houston, Las Vegas, and New Jersey areas.
That's like a self-gratification thing though, too.
Yes.
That just goes right back to him. I mean, he might be helping all the gals trying to go to nursing school or whatever they say now, but like that is definitely 100% for him. Like, don't get twisted. It's not for them.
I also, like, I feel like I keep going back to shitting on the Celtics, which is just like my default when I'm talking about the NBA, which is funny because I'm such a big Boston fan for every other sport. But that was like also the thing that bothers me about this series with them, is that Embiid's out for game 1.
Mhm.
So the Celtics like take care of business in the first round. They look good doing it. The Bucks are out of the playoffs. It's like, oh man, the East is wide open. This is the Celtics conference now. And they let James Harden come into their building, drop 40 plus on them, and they lose.
Yeah.
With no Embiid. And I'm like, that's the game you have to have in a playoff series. You cannot let Philly have a game like that. Boston just continues to do it. I mean, as we speak, it's almost end of the second quarter and they're down by double digits at home again.
Oh my gosh. And to your point, when Embiid's out of the picture, who else is scoring on that team besides James Harden? I mean, yeah, you got Tyrese Maxey, you have Tobias Harris, but there's not a lot of, at least in this series, there hasn't been like a lot.
Are you
scoring.
Scared of any of those players?
Yeah, especially in this series. Tyrese Maxey has not played well. Tobias Harris is Tobias Harris.
But also the Celtics are a team that's specifically built to stop those types of guys.
Yeah.
James Harden should not be scoring 40 plus on a team that has Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum out on the floor.
Well, so in their defense, I will say that, like, if James Harden's been a facilitator for the greater part of the season, that, like, I know that he's had flashes of, his former self, but like, I think the expectation is he's going to continue to just stay in that role. So when he starts to explode and go off, it's like, okay, kind of jarring. And those guys with their experience probably should have recognized that. But the fact of the matter is that, like, he had a really, really good game. I don't know, like, how else to, praise him for that. But I mean, he used to be like one of the best scorers in the league. And I don't know It was a one-shot thing. You probably could have had like better defense or, double team him or, whatever you could have done. But he's good for one of those games. And I just think the Celtics probably weren't considering or thinking about that.
Yeah, it's kind of the nature of the game today, too, that if he's hitting like step back threes and stuff like that, there's not a whole lot you can do to stop that. So
No.
we'll see how the rest of that series plays out. Like I said, Philly's up double digits in Boston right now at the half, but they were up double digits at home in game 4, and Boston came back and really should have had game 4 in Philadelphia. So that one's not over. Let's go on to the other series that has a game tonight, and that is Denver versus Phoenix. Something that's been really back and forth. It's another one that's tied 2-2, game 5 immediately following the Boston game that's on now. This seems like a good series to study for media overreactions to basketball. Denver wins the first 2, and everybody's talking about how they're going to win the championship and how the Kevin Durant trade was a total bust and Phoenix is done and blah, blah.
They didn't win the first 2. The first game was almost a 20-point blowout, and the second game was 10 points. That's like those are commanding leads.
Oh, yeah. No,
I
so
would say
they dominated, especially in game 2, where it's like 97-87 is not a game that you would expect in this type of series. But then the Suns get 2 at home without Chris Paul, and all of a sudden we're 2-2, and the narrative is completely shifted.
This is like a prime example of that basketball is a game of runs, and basketball is like pretty fickle with its consistency at some points in time. If you're a couple of guys have an off night and you're playing against Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, like, of course they have the capacity to just like ram it down your throat. But like, Jokic bounces back, has a good game tonight. It could be another, game 2. Chris Paul not being there for the, not being able to play I think a lot of people would disagree with me here, but like in the playoffs, he's always like injury prone. So you can't rely on him to be there, or like you're going to be worried that he's going to get hurt. And now they're playing with like house money. Like Chris Paul's out. If they lose, all right, whatever. It's, kind of expected, but they get to just go do their thing. And Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are really kind of picking up where they left off as far as the Olympics and whatnot are concerned, and they're kind of hitting their stride. So I think that it gives them a little bit more liberty to play without having to worry about making sure that, CP gets the ball or gets his looks and that kind of thing. I don't know, Devin, I'm going to riff this off of you a little bit. What do you think about like that kind of stuff? Do you think that has an impact? Do you think it's positive, negative? Like, what are your thoughts?
They're definitely winning solely because of those two. I mean, who else on that team is really contributing? I mean, DeAndre Ayton's playing his role, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I guess I could see that. Obviously, I don't think Chris Paul is a minus if he's on the floor, clearly. But yeah, the fact that they're basically, I mean, Devin Booker's just going off. They're literally allowing him to he's got the green light all the time. And while obviously having Chris Paul be a guy who can set both of them up for good opportunities, maybe just kind of, when you're down 2 games, you're just like, look, we got 2 guys that can give us 30. So maybe we just got to let it fly. And it's working right now. Devin Booker is clearly playing the best that I've ever seen him play ever at any point in his career. Kevin Durant is like also playing really well. Obviously his threes aren't really falling, but it kind of doesn't matter. And I agree with you. It seems like whether Chris Paul is just his body breaks down at the end of the year, after the regular season, or what, he's either just like not really the same, or he does inevitably get hurt. I mean, kind of going back to what I was saying about that 2018 series with Houston and Golden State. I mean, he got hurt in that series, if I remember correctly, and it was kind of one of the main reasons why they were unable to get it done.
Blew out that hamstring.
And he was still like, a top point guard at that point in time. Not that he's not really a good player anymore. He's still great, but Yeah, I don't
So
know. I could see that being the case. I mean, they're clearly Denver is having a hard time stopping whatever Phoenix has been doing the past 2 games. So
prior to the injury, he was averaging about 35 and a half minutes, which is the third most on the team behind Durant and Booker. And like he's part of the banana boat crew, right? So he's not like, but I don't think he's taking care of his body like LeBron has. You get beat up and little things start to nag. And then in the playoffs, you try and switch it into the higher gear. And I think that's probably what happens a lot of time is that he just puts miles and miles and miles on his legs in the season. And then when he gets into this, you get a little more physical. You get people wanting to, come out and come at you a little harder. And that takes its toll.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if it's necessarily that he doesn't like put in the same effort as LeBron, although it's hard to say really anyone puts in that same level of effort because the man spelled. They say he spends $1 million on his body every year. I would expect it's probably easily over that. Chris Paul is on the smaller side for a modern point guard at this point, anyways, right? And when you are smaller and you are playing against everyone else who's just, quite frankly, significantly larger than you, that stuff adds up a lot faster because you're putting a lot more stress on everything in your body. And I mean, quite frankly, I'm a little surprised that he has done as well and survived as long as he has in the NBA, because to be smaller and generate the kind of power he needed to when he was younger to blow by a guy, like that's a lot of force on a small area. So, but I mean, his value has still always been being the smartest player on the floor to get the right shot for the right player at the right time. But right now, honestly, it almost looks like all three of them was too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Right?
Devin Booker is leading the team in points, assists, and steals right now in the postseason.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they look like they've been better without Chris Paul because they've won the 2 games without him. The thing is right now, Booker is averaging 36, about 36, 5 and 9 in this series. Kevin Durant is 32, 10 and 5. This is exactly what the Suns were picturing when they made the Kevin Durant trade. Yeah. I think the issue with the Durant trade, though, is that it's left them so thin that if Booker and Durant don't combine for 70 or more points in a game, that they're going to lose. So the 2 losses, they combined for 56 and 59. The 2 wins, they combined for 86, which is tied for like third most of 2 players all time in a playoff game, and 72 in the last win. So it'll be interesting to see if they can do that in Denver. And they're going to need to, because on the other side, Jokic has been an absolute monster. I mean, he's averaging 36, 14, and 10 right now, which is an absolutely ridiculous stat line. But it just kind of outlines like why I was so meh on the Nuggets going into the playoffs, especially as a contender, just because like they can't stop wing players, especially not dominant ones like Booker and Durant.
Adam, going back to the Suns really quick, are you telling me you don't believe in Landry Shamet? You don't think he's just gonna come in and drop 20 a game? No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, he did in the last game.
He did play good, but I feel like he's always that player that like he's been traded a lot, and I feel like people always really expect him to. I don't know. He's fine, but
maybe it'll work this time.
They're very thin. I was just agreeing with what
he is like the definition of maybe it'll work this time for an NBA player, though, where it's just like we know that he didn't blossom in LA, but maybe we'll trade for him in Brooklyn. And then like the Suns are like, well, he didn't really work out in Brooklyn, but maybe in Phoenix. And it
was just a bad situation. We'll bring him over here. See if
it's just going to keep going.
It's going to be like 35 and people are going to keep saying that about him.
I do want to say that it is like, I think like a theme for the playoffs, we could say this year is like maturity, because Jokic, his game has matured and he himself has matured so much over the last 2 seasons. Like maybe his style of play isn't completely different, but I would say overall he is a completely different player. He's way more reliable. Like he's way more willing to go out and do the stuff that's hard in order to win games. And as a center, I really appreciate like what he brings to the Nuggets. And it does my heart good to see that he's like a triple double guy. Like
I feel bad for him right now because like the two losses, he had 30, 17, and 17 in the first loss. And then he scored 51 points in game 4, making him the second center ever to have 50 plus in a playoff game. The only other one was Wilt Chamberlain.
Wow.
It's like, what else does this guy have to do to get a win?
He's really ramped up the scoring, like, because he's a guy, in the regular season, he'll give you 25 points a game. And the fact that he's averaging 36, 37 in this series is like, and efficiently, he's really made an effort to just be like, I'm also going to be scoring the ball every chance I can get.
Yeah.
It's pretty insane. The numbers he puts up are ridiculous.
3-point percentage, I think, is 47% right now, which is crazy. Like, really, really good.
He's grown into that mentality that like, fine, fuck it, I'll do it myself. That we want to see from Jason Tatum.
Who are your like people who are really going to come in and like help punch somebody in the teeth on that team? Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, like KCP, like who are the guys? Like this KCP. Is like LeBron.
To be fair, Aaron Gordon's
LeBron dragging the Cavs to the finals, except he's doing it in a much harder conference.
Speaking of Bruce Brown and KCP, Matt, isn't it great to just see former Pistons players thriving on a playoff team? It's so weird. No, I wouldn't say thriving, but they're on a team top seed in the West.
I always liked Bruce Brown though.
No, I always liked I liked both of them. It was just obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, tangent for another time, I suppose. But I liked Bruce Brown a lot too. But
yeah, I thought he had more potential than anyone was giving him credit for in Detroit, and that has kind of proven true since he's left. But yeah, I mean, good for those guys to at least. I will give KCP some credit. I think he is a much better player now than he was in Detroit.
Well,
it's been coaching for them. Like that's the story of it. Like they got poor coaches, and then like you get guys who can be developed into good talent, and they give up on them because the coaching staff isn't like utilizing them to the best of their ability.
Well, and I think KCP kind of got a little bit of humble pie after he kind of went into free agency and never got the deal that he was expecting to get. And some guys need that.
Yeah, I just want to take a minute to remind everybody that this is a playoff podcast. and so there's no room to talk about the Pistons.
We're talking about players who are in the playoff.
You know what's funny is like whenever
I squeeze one of those in for Matt. Like, come on.
I know, but
let him have it.
Until this year, whenever I would talk shit, Matt would be like, okay, well, we can't talk about the Kings either. But now we can talk about the Kings because they are a playoff team, just not anymore. The other thing I was thinking watching this series is that Phoenix just should have let Ayton go to the Pacers.
Yep.
They're paying homeboy $30+ million to average 10 and 8 right now. And they didn't want him there anyway. They all hate him.
Right.
I might push back a little bit on that. I'll let Matt go first.
So I still think Ayton is a very good player, and he brings a lot to the team. I will say that $30 million a year investment would probably be better invested elsewhere, because you can probably find those roles cheaper, use the rest of that resource for your roster building to create more depth.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think my case for Ayton staying put is he's a guy who keeps you honest. Like you can't just you can't just leave him be, because he can score a little bit, and he's long and he's relatively quick. He's not the quickest guy, but like he can play defense a little bit, and he can grab balls out of the air. So like even if he's not like the greatest player, the greatest fit on the team, he's still somebody that you have to be aware of, or else like they're just going to kill you with him. And it might not happen, very many times this season, but he is capable of that. And I think that that's really good when you have, like if somebody's not having such a great scoring night and the defense is lax, or they don't have the height down low to stop him, then he's like a tool that you can use. That's why I think I would have kept him.
No, and I know he's going up against Jokic, which is a bad matchup for everybody.
Yeah.
But it's the like lack of effort and the attitude for me with DeAndre Ayton is that I just feel like there's someplace he would rather be than defending the paint in a playoff game. You saw it the other night where Jokic missed a shot and DeAndre Ayton basically just stood under the rim and like let Jokic get the offensive rebound.
Yeah.
Like a couple of times. It was like 3 or 4 offensive rebounds and DeAndre Ayton didn't even go for one. And if I'm like Booker and Durant, I'm like, God, I'm out here killing myself playing 45 minutes a game. I got to carry this team on my back. And we're paying this dude $30 million to stand there and watch Jokic score. I would be pissed if I was those guys. Like Matt said, like if you invest that somewhere else, you might be better off.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to be somewhere else. He wants to be on a team that didn't openly not want him.
That's
interesting. I remember you guys had me on the podcast once, and we were talking about like the best players under the age of 24 or 23 or something at the time. And I was the one who brought up DeAndre Ayton. I was like, I was pretty high on him as a player. And to be fair, throughout the regular season, like he's really good. But I do think that this series is kind of really shows that there have been a lot of advanced stats for Jokic's defense and his, on-off stats, like how much he actually impacts the defense for the Nuggets, while seemingly not really being a defensive center or someone that you would consider to be a good defender. I think this series really does kind of show that it's just like, not only is he going to score over Ayton every time, but like seemingly Ayton can't really do a whole lot on the offensive end in this series.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about this the other day that like the Kings get a bunch of crap and the Hawks get a bunch of crap for not drafting Luka Doncic. No one ever says the Phoenix should have taken Luka over Ayton. Like we never have that conversation, but like this team could have Devin Booker and Luka Doncic, and like maybe they don't have Kevin Durant in that scenario, but they botched that one just as much as everybody else did.
I would say that if Ayton would embrace the role, like Ayton needs to change his perspective and understand that like his job is to not like do the fun, sexy stuff. It's to do the work that nobody else wants to do. Yeah. It's to bang inside. It's to play defense. It's to get rebounds. If he put like a hat like Tim Duncan on, he would be fucking phenomenal. But Tim Duncan wasn't a sexy player. He was the big fundamental, and it's because he did the little things right. And he would be willing to grind out and do the shit that other players wouldn't want to do. And if Ayton had that attitude, I think things would be much different for him there.
Yeah, just the way this podcast works. They play tonight, and this podcast is going to come out tomorrow. Ayton's going to have like 45 and 24 or something like that.
Career playoff
highs. But let's go to playoff
all
series.
All those points scored in the paint.
All of them, all over Jokic as well. Let's go to playoff series number 3, though. Another one that's been really interesting. Lakers and Warriors just had game 4 last night. The Lakers now lead 3-1. This Lakers team is kind of starting to feel like a little 2020 Lakersy to me, the team that won the bubble championship. Just in the way that the team is mostly based around LeBron and Davis. And then you just have like these random role players who are stepping up all over the place. Like, if you remember in the bubble, Rajon Rondo all of a sudden became a 40% three-point shooter for the playoffs, like out of nowhere. And you kind of seeing that a little bit with this team with like D'Lo's been really good for them kind of randomly. And then like you have game 4 last night where D'Lo goes 1 for 10, but Lonnie Walker comes in and scores 15 points in the fourth quarter. And it's like, if you have LeBron and Davis, and then you just have these random role players who are going to get super hot all the time, this team all of a sudden becomes a lot scarier than they were most of the season.
I see the similarities there. I'm also looking at the teams that they've played and where the Lakers' talent is concentrated. Honestly, what I've seen through the first two series that they've played is they've played two teams that don't have a physical answer for Anthony Davis. And Anthony Davis is a guy who, like, when he's great. But if you get physical with him, he kind of disappears. So,
well, he disappears because he's going back to the locker room because he has an injury. He's changing his street clothes. Like that's what he's doing.
Yeah, even when he stays on the floor though, he retreats into his shell.
There is some weird effort stuff with him.
He does not like physical basketball.
There is some effort stuff with Anthony Davis sometimes where I don't like his body language a lot of the time, but the way he is defended in this series is incredible to me. And because there've been a lot of times, I mean, at the end of that last game, he was on Steph Curry and played very, defended really well to stop the last possessions that they got. The Warriors were doing a lot of really smart stuff, I felt like, with getting him in the pick and roll just to like bring him away from the paint, even though it wasn't like he's good defending the switch, but they needed to just get him out of the paint, and it was working really well for the first half of that game. But I still found that when he was in situations where he had to defend Steph or just someone else on the perimeter, he did an incredible job. And then obviously when he's in the paint, he's kind of just been an absolute game changer for him. And then, when he starts off scoring really well or has, what was it? I don't know if it was the last game or the game before where he had like a 20-point first half or something, and it was incredibly efficient. If he's playing like that, and if he's the best player for the Lakers in the series and he's playing that way, it's hard to stop him.
Yeah, no, I mean, the rosters of both the Kings and the Warriors is like it suits him, right? Because he's allowed to kind of be that guardian near the rim, but also, okay, you want him out in space. Well, he's a great athlete. He can move laterally. His worst nightmare is Steven Adams. And he did not have to see Steven Adams. And
I was going to bring this up.
I wonder how things look. Should they run into? I mean, they'll either run into DeAndre Ayton or Jokic, both big, strong guys. I mean, obviously, we kind of just talked about some of the effort issues with Ayton a little bit, but like I got to imagine whichever one he faces, should they, reach the conference finals, they're going to throw their weight around, and he's going to have to respond to that.
Yeah, they haven't played a team with a good true center who's going to like and do the things, play physical against Davis. Like they didn't play that with Memphis and Golden State. I don't really think like has the center that would be needed to kind of knock him off his pedestal at this moment. But I think that like LeBron's been playing pretty well. A lot of their midseason trade players have been playing really well. And I think that's like the difference maker there. It always seems like at the trade deadline, LeBron, makes a bunch of moves and he's just, got people who, I don't know, he likes more than whoever was there before, and he gets them involved somehow.
Yeah, it really feels like the difference in this series so far has been that the players around LeBron and Anthony Davis have stepped up, and the players around Steph Curry have stepped down. We've seen some pretty gnarly performances out of Klay Thompson, both in the first round against the Kings, but also like last night, he was pretty bad. Draymond is going to be Draymond. He's going to be someone who's super important specifically to that team, but he's also going to cost them games in the playoffs. Like we saw it last year too.
He's a liability right now.
And then,
in my opinion,
like Jordan Poole has just been
terrible.
Oh my God.
Awful.
Yeah.
I cannot stand watching Jordan Poole play.
It's so bad. I
Yeah.
mean, so I was rooting against them in the first round. Obviously, they're playing the Kings, and every time Jordan Poole got the ball, I'm like, oh God, please shoot it. Please shoot this, Jordan Poole. But we spent time last year. So Devin, you were on with us for the whole playoffs last year, and we spent a ton of time actually praising the Warriors front office and all the moves they made. That was before they went and gave Jordan Poole a massive contract. How do you feel about that now? Because it's kind of hamstrung them going forward.
I agree. I mean, I probably praised Jordan Poole on there because I feel like he played really well for them for the most part last season. I mean, they won a title with him. And yeah, I feel like you can see it in the body language of his teammates a lot of the times. Like he will take the most bonehead shots sometimes, and I feel like you can look on Steph Curry's face or Klay Thompson's taken some wild shots in this series too, especially in that last game. But I feel like his teammates get very upset with the way that he plays, and you can just kind of see that they're like, that wasn't a good shot, man. Like don't be doing that. And I feel like he only really brings to the table, all he really brings to the table is that just erratic scorer who can get hot. And just like, if he's not doing that, which he hasn't done, what else is he bringing to your team? Is he really worth that amount of money? And
he's just J.R. Smith.
He's J.R. Smith, but it's like even J.R. Smith was more consistent than
Yeah.
Like, I think of a lot of those kinds of players throughout the course of history. Jamal Crawford, a lot of those guys that would either be a sixth man or just be a guy who was just basically instant offense. It's like, they're pretty streaky a lot of the time, but Jordan Poole just in a way, playing with Steph and Klay, like you're around that every day. You start to model your game after that, which is great. Like, I mean, I can't imagine it. I imagine playing with players like that is nothing but a positive for you as a player, especially if you care about what you're doing. But like, part of me thinks he just thinks he's Steph Curry, or he thinks he's that guy, like who can do that and take the kinds of shots that Steph Curry just takes all the time. And sometimes they need Jordan Poole to take those shots, but I feel like he takes them at the wrong times in the wrong spots a lot.
There is one person that has over 50% shooting from 3-point on Golden State's team. You want to take a guess at who it is?
I'm going to go with Kuminga.
Nope. Moses Moody.
Oh my God.
Steph shooting 37.9% and Klay shooting or 37.9% and Klay shooting 39%. So the praise that we heaped on Jokic and some of these other guys who are just shooting absolutely lights out in the playoffs right now, you have the two greatest shooters, arguably, right, that have played the game, are not like doing the things that you would expect them to do and stepping up in the playoffs. Like they're kind of floundering, and I don't know why that is. I think Matt knows I love watching Golden State play.
Yeah.
Despite them not having a center on their fucking roster. Somebody's figured them out, or they're tired or something, because like the shooting performances you would expect out of those two guys specifically have not been happening.
Yeah. You said they don't have a center on their roster, but I watched Looney give us 20 rebounds multiple times against the Kings. It was pretty rough.
Looney was going off against the Kings.
Yeah. My thing with Golden State is that this team is just not the same team it was last year, and they're just not good enough to get it done again as currently constructed. And Steph's doing all the Steph stuff, but like guys like Klay and Draymond and Poole and all these guys around him are just not the same guys they were in the playoffs last year. And I don't know what this team does to get better, because the salary cap for next year is $134 million. They've committed $184 million right now, and that's before Draymond picks up his $27.5 million player option. Yeah. So they could be on the hook for like, what, 200 plus to bring back this exact same team. And the only moves you have to make is like, do you package like Moody and Kuminga in a contract? Like, you're not going to be able to trade Poole Draymond leaving for them might actually be a negative because he's been a liability for them, but he's incredibly important to this team. Like, I don't know what they do this offseason to get better.
Well, I don't think this will happen, but I think in order for them to make like another step towards getting back to where they were, you got to decide whether or not you're going to take Draymond or Jordan. Like I believe that. I think there was initially at the beginning of the season, I think, Matt and I had kind of talked about this. I thought that fight that took place was like much to do about nothing. But I think as the season's gone on and what we've seen, that is not true. And I think that there is going to be a lot of a big rift there and a lot of hurt feelings. And these guys act like middle schoolers, like when their feelings are hurt, because they can just like cross their arms and I demand a trade. And then like the owners are like, well, what they're going to pay him to sit on the bench. Let's get him the fuck out of here. So I genuinely think that like it's got to be Poole or Green. Like they have to decide on one and part ways with the other.
Yeah, one of the most important things we do on this podcast is the preseason vibe check in the NFL, because you could just tell like the vibes on a team are off and they're not going to be good. Yeah. And like Golden State, the vibes have been off ever since the very beginning of the season when that fight broke out. And then the team comes out, they're just bad. Guys are hurt. They can't win on the road. And like at some point, you just are who we thought you were. A lot of like analysts and stuff just expected these guys to turn it on for the playoffs and be like, okay, the real Golden State's going to come out. This is the real Golden State. This is them this year. They have not been a good team this season.
No, I mean, I said that multiple times heading into the playoffs. There's a reason why they were seeded as low as they are. And, via text, you and I kind of went back and forth on like some stats that really highlight why this series has gone the way that it has. Golden State has been one of the worst teams all season at getting to the line. And if I remember correctly, the other stat was that they were one of the worst teams in the NBA as well, in terms of their rate of following the opposing team as well. While the Lakers were number one in both of those.
And what's that come down to? Discipline. That's all it is. Literally, it's just discipline. Yeah.
I think it's also important to point out that even though LeBron James is, he's old, this Warriors team, their core as a whole is like they're older now. Like the team itself is getting older. I wouldn't say they're super old, especially with the way Steph Curry plays. Yeah, he's 34, but or 35 maybe even. Yeah, he still is like I do kind of feel like he's better now than he even was a couple of years ago. But their team, Clay's after a while, things kind of come to an end. And this, depending on how this series goes, how it finishes could maybe be, I don't want to say it's going to be the end of a dynasty or anything like that, but the team's had a good run. Their core is getting older. It'll be interesting to see what kind of changes they make or who they decide to go with, moving forward, whether it's if they're making trades to get rid of Draymond, Jordan Poole, whatever they're doing, shaking up something with their team.
Yeah. I mean, there was a point where, like Steph was the scariest player in the NBA, and Klay Thompson was a player that you were equally as scared of, because on any given night, he could be even better than Steph Curry could be. And I mean, he had that run of something like 13 straight made threes in one game or something like that. But since that injury, since he tore his ACL, if I'm remembering the injury correctly, like he has come back to a degree from it. He's certainly a weapon. He's not the same force he was before. And sure, some of that is the injury, but I think Devin's got a point. an element of that is certainly the age.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's similar to James Harden in the fact that like when it was like they passed a certain threshold, they lost a step. And for Clay's game, losing a step is extremely detrimental to where James Harden can travel and get open shots because that's what he does. And, like the step backs, people can argue the validity of if it is a travel or not, but like he's really good at that. Whereas you don't see as much of that out of Clay, and he's lost a step. And that quickness is the difference between being like a superstar in the NBA and being a role player and eventually like finding your way out of the league. And we've seen that a lot over the years with like really talented guys.
Definitely. So the last playoff series we have, I saved this one for last because this is the one I feel is the least interesting. The Heat and the Knicks. Heat currently up 3-1 after yesterday. It sounds kind of obvious, but I feel like the Heat are a good team that underachieved all season, and the Knicks are like a decent team that overachieved all season. And that the Heat just have guys who step up in the playoffs, especially Jimmy, but they've had other guys step up. And on the other side, the Knicks have Julius Randle. And that's been the problem for them in this series.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, experience helps. Experience is like, one of the things that you see consistently. Teams who win, they often have like a lot of guys who have a lot of experience, in the playoffs. And I don't think like the Knicks roster is relatively young, so like it doesn't surprise me seeing them get knocked around the way that they are, because you're playing a guy who I would imagine has his DNA spliced with like great white shark, because as soon as there's blood in the water, he's just like ravenous and going crazy.
Yeah, I'm done trying to like understand why Jimmy Butler or how Jimmy Butler does this in the playoffs. He's playing so good in the playoffs this year. Like he's one of the best players out of, take any of those guys that we've talked about today, Jokic, Devin Booker, any of these guys that are just kind of performing game in, game out. Like Jimmy Butler he's averaging like 33 points a game in the playoffs. And it's
33,
actually
6-5 right now.
It's incredible. And they're a team whose offense in the regular season was really bad. Like they were one of the worst offensive teams in the league. I don't know. It's just, he gives them so much. And it's fascinating to me. Because I mean, I'd be curious to ask you guys like kind of what you think about him as a player, just overall, like where he's kind of sits in the league for you, because this team was a play-in team. I mean, yeah, they beat the Bucks, right? And the Bucks are obviously better than the Knicks, clearly. But you're kind of thinking like, if you're the Knicks, you're like, okay, good, we got the Heat now. Like, yeah, they just took out the 1 seed, but like they're not going to do it again. Like that was a one-time thing, right? And they're probably going to make it to the conference finals as a team that barely snuck into the play-in game. Like
it would take a monumental effort from the Knicks for the Heat not to make it to the conference finals.
Yeah,
they're on the ropes now.
No, I'm talking like before the series starts, like the Knicks. You're probably thinking as the Knicks before that series starts, like yeah, sure, they beat Milwaukee, but like we're a good team too. Like they barely snuck into the playoffs. Like we got this, and I don't know. It's just crazy to me.
So it's hard for me to like put a number right now on like where I'm thinking we're putting Jimmy in our annual top 30 this year. But Adam and I have kind of asked each other this question a couple times already this playoffs. But like, do or die situation in the playoffs, like what players are you taking over Jimmy Butler?
Yeah, I think that's been one of the more controversial stances of this podcast the last couple of years has been that Jimmy Butler is a top 10 NBA player.
Yeah.
And people are like, regular season, all NBA, blah, blah. I do not care what happens during the regular season. When it matters, Jimmy is like, it's like Matt said, you're trying to win a championship.
Yeah.
How many guys are you really taking over Jimmy Butler?
Like, can you really sit there with a straight face and tell me that in the playoffs, with what we've seen, you want Jason Tatum instead of Jimmy Butler?
Well, the thing I think you guys aren't considering is like Jimmy Butler is a superhero when he moonlights because like he's Spider-Man. And I'm not talking about Spider-Man Peter Parker. I'm talking about he is like the most bitter, fucking angry individual who is wielding every ounce of his energy to spite everybody who's ever like said anything nasty about him.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to see that like he doesn't play with that kind of fury in the regular season, which I'm sure it would take an enormous amount of energy to do that. But like the way that he turns it on, like I do think that it's just like he has an enormous boulder on his shoulder as soon as the playoffs start, and he's just like, I'm gonna make bulletin board, locker room material for all these assholes, and like I don't care, you guys can be with me or against me, but I'm gonna drag us kicking and screaming through this because like fuck everybody else except Tibbs. He fucks with Tibbs.
Yeah,
he would. That's kind of the thing about the Heat, though, is like, so Jimmy's going to be awesome.
Yep.
But the thing that's kind of scary about the team right now is like, you don't know who the second best player on the team is going to be on a night-to-night basis, but it's going to be someone. Like,
well, you don't know who the second best scorer is going to be.
Yeah,
but it's always Bam.
I know you want to say Bam, but like
in terms of player.
I know, but Bam disappears sometimes too.
Yeah, I want him to be more aggressive.
But yeah, from like a scoring perspective, especially though, it's like, okay, Jimmy's going to lead the team in points. And there are so many teams out there and teams that are in the playoffs right now where it's like, okay, we got one guy who is number 2. And like for the Heat, it's just a different guy every night. Like, game 1, Gabe Vincent goes for 20. Game 2, there's no Jimmy, but Caleb Martin and Gabe Vincent both go for over 20. Game 3, it's like Struss and Bam. Game 4, it's Bam again. Like these guys just step up and kind of take on like Jimmy's personality.
Their roster is really interesting. Like if you look at it, I don't think anybody else averages over 20 points on the team. Like but you have a bunch of guys who easily get 10 and who could pop off for more. I mean, Kyle Lowry, Kevin Love, Victor Oladipo, like when he's healthy and getting stuff done, Tyler Hero, like all of those guys, if you put them on another roster, you could expect 15 to 20 from them, I think, a night. Like maybe not consistently, but I think like more often than not, they're going to be ahead of a lot of other players on the score sheet. And it's literally Jimmy Butler with 33 points, and then Bam Adebayo with 17, and then it's 12, 11, 11, 10, 10, 8. Like everybody is getting touches and they're getting points.
Say with Kevin Love, he hasn't really shot the ball well this series, but he played really well in round 1, and I feel like he kind of offers like another stabilizing presence on the team in a weird way. Mm-hmm. He's been sort of, I kind of, when the playoffs started, I forgot he was even on the team. I didn't even know. I mean, I knew, but I forgot that the Cavs just kind of let him go.
I got to give Clint credit here. When that move was made, when they picked up Kevin Love, Clint was on it about that being a really, really big, good pickup for them. Just in the area of doing the little things and creating the culture and the aura that they need in order to be able to be successful. Because you got to survive the 2 minutes that Jimmy's not on the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier in the podcast about like Mamba mentality and about how like the Celtics don't have that killer mentality kind of thing. And there's not like a lot of players right now who act like the way that like Michael Jordan and Kobe acted, right? Like nobody really like screams as much anymore. And like Jimmy's that dude though. Like Jimmy got kicked out of a Wolves practice when he was in Minnesota because he's just was like went out and just gave it to everybody for the entire practice. So I mean, it works if the roster is like built a certain way.
Yeah.
And you need to have that mix of veterans in there for the roster to work that way. Because if it's like Jimmy and a bunch of young guys, like it was in Philly, he just hurts everybody's feelings. And then there's problems. And then he's got to
baby mode for sure.
But when it's Jimmy and Kyle Lowry and Kevin Love and like these guys who just want to win, he can just be himself. And that's what makes this team so good.
Playoff experience. Like look at the roster, look at the playoff experience. You have guys who've won championships. You've got guys who've been to the finals. Like you have a lot of these things. And I would say, especially in the NBA, like playoff experience is really, really important. And I think that was another reason why I thought Kevin Love was a good pickup, was because he has experience. He's lost and he's also won. So he kind of knows the ebbs and flows of the game really well. He's a shell of his former self, but he's going to give you an opportunity to stretch the floor. I think that like the other kind of wild card that you have, in my opinion, who like doesn't ever see game time and all these other things, is Udonis Haslem. Like he's another guy who's going to get after your ass if you're not making the plays that you got to make. Like he's going to he is not going to allow people to take a playoff. Like he's going to get in your face. He's going to get pissed. And he has such like a cachet in Miami that like, I think, that's a really big presence and that's really important for them.
Also, we can't forget they have Eric Spoelstra.
Yes.
Who
very, very good coach.
I mean, that series with Milwaukee really, he just outcoached.
He took him. He ended a man's job.
And it's just the fact. I mean, because what was it? Was it a year ago, 2 years ago, when Eric Spoelstra and Jimmy Butler kind of had an altercation on the court at one point in time? But it was like he fits the team just as much as the players do, and he allows them. Like he allows players like Jimmy Butler to kind of have freedom while also just being like an actual coach. He makes adjustments when he needs to. He's playing different lineups if he has to. He's clearly, as much as part of the of their team success as anybody else on that team.
Well, and it gets overlooked a lot, but like he is one of the best X's and O's coaches in the NBA. He's very, very good in that department.
Heat culture is a real thing. The Heat are a very culture-driven team, and that's what allows them to be successful in the playoffs. And then on the other side, the Knicks just have Julius Randle, and that's a problem for them. But we have to sign off. So that is it for us. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast. You can hit us up on Twitter at Fouled Out Sports. You can find Matt on Twitter at Matador_defense. And you can find our videos on TikTok at Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It's a long name, but you can't miss it. Devin, Clint, thank you guys for being here. It's always fun to talk basketball with both of you. We're looking forward to doing this podcast with you guys today and getting back into the NBA season.
I was too. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun as always.
Yep, we may see you guys again in the playoffs. So,
okay.
But everybody enjoy the games. You got Celtics and 76ers. Oh God. 76ers are actually killing the Celtics in the fourth quarter. So that'll be interesting. But Phoenix and Denver on tonight, and then a couple great games before Matt and I are back next week to start breaking down conference finals for you guys.
Yeah. So everyone go out, find the Julius Randle in your life and remove that.
It's costing you more than you think it is. But all right, we'll see you guys soon. Bye, guys.
Have a good one.
Bye. Bye, Robin.
Bye, Mom.